Okay, for chapter 22, we're going to look at the origin of species. We've talked about the Galapagos Islands and the discoveries that Darwin made there, the finches, the tortoises. We also have the flightless bird that he found on the Galapagos Islands. And so this bird, its ancestors had flight, both the evolution of the bird on the islands, more of a diving bird, and so thought to maybe get rid of the drag. He lost some of the breadth of his wings, and his tail look more juvenile than they do adult-like. So as we've talked about in the past, what drives the formation of a new species is survival of the fittest. The speciation, process by which one species splits into two or more species. The typical definition of a species is that they can interbreed and make fertile offspring. We can have two mechanisms to create new species. We can have microevolution, so a lot of small changes over a long period of time that leads to the formation of a new species, or we can have a very sudden change, so a microevolution, like a volcanic eruption or a mass extinction because an asteroid hits the Earth. And so these can be macroevolutionary, where you have a sudden creation of a new species, not the slow change over time that we see in microevolution. So the Latin meaning of species is kind or appearance. So you appear or you're the same kind. And as I just mentioned, we typically think of the biological species concept, where members have the potential to interbreed and produce viable, and that's critical, viable fertile offspring. And they do not breed successively with other groups. And so we can have lots of diversity within a species, or we can have them where they look fairly similar. But the main thing is that they can interbreed and they can produce viable, fertile offspring. There are over 20 different concepts for species. You can have morphological, you can have ecological, but the one that we are going to focus on is biological. So what are some of the things that can lead to speciation? And so we can have reproductive isolation. And with reproductive isolation, we can have pre-zygotic, so before the formation of the zygote. And so two gametes come together to make a zygote. And we can have post-zygotic barriers. And so there are 5 well-known pre-zygotic and 3 well-known post-zygotic. And this will be that answer to that big question you have in your possible exam questions for chapter 22. So these are our pre-zygotic: habitat, temporal, behavioral, mechanical, or gametic isolation. And so this somehow impedes the breeding between these different species, preventing the successful completion of mating and therefore no viable offspring. Habitat isolation. So it can be as simple as that one of the species prefers an apple versus another species prefers blueberries. Therefore, they never come together because apples and blueberries don't grow together on the same plant. And so they never encounter each other, or very rarely do. And because of this, they inhabit 2 different habitats. Another classic example are tigers and lions. Yes, they can make a fertile offspring, but because tigers live in a tropical jungle atmosphere or habitat, and the lions live on a prairie habitat, they don't typically meet. Therefore, they don't interbreed. Temporal isolation, so breed different times of the day, different times of the year. And so here's an example of 2 skunks. And these 2 skunks, this is the western and this is the eastern. Western breeds in late summer, whereas Eastern will breed in late winter. And so the times in which they are fertile and come into heat are separated by months, and so they don't interbreed. Behavioral isolation. So these are the blue-footed boobies of the Galapagos Islands, and the mates show each other their feet to try to attract a mate. So the male here showing the female his pretty blue feet so that he will interest her and they will breed. So this is a behavioral. It can be songs. So we've talked about the finches and their songs. We've talked about behaviors that will cause no interbreeding between similar species. So here is a visual of our blue-footed booty and their courtship dance.
The Galapagos blue-footed booby, Sula nebusii, is the most common booby in the archipelago. It nests near the coast of most of the islands and feeds close to shore. This video shows blue-footed boobies filmed during their courtship ritual. You can see the birds displaying their blue feet to each other and holding their wings back while tilting their bills up, a behavior called sky pointing. Although both male and female are approximately the same size, they can be distinguished by their vocalizations and their eyes. The female's voice is a definite honk, while the male whistles during courtship. The female's eye has a noticeably larger pupil. In this sequence, the male booby is the one seeking the female's attention with the sky-pointing behavior. Credit, Richard Benz, Wycliffe School.
You can also see it in the giraffes.
These two giraffes on the Serengeti Plain in Africa are bumping each other's necks in a courtship ritual. Courtship usually involves a complex set of behaviors believed to serve as confirmation that the participants are of the same species but of opposite sex, are in good physiological condition, and do not threaten each other. Credit, National Geographic.
Another prezygotic barrier is our mechanical isolation. This is an example of some snails. So if two snails come together with the spirals in the same direction, then their genitalia, which you're pointing to by these white arrows, cannot align. And so only when two snails come together with their spirals in opposite directions can their genitalia come together correctly and they can have a successful mating. So this is a physical, mechanical barrier that prevents different species from breeding. You can have gametic isolation. So the gamete in humans are your egg and your sperm. In the sea urchin that we see here, the purple and the orange, they also have eggs and sperm, but because of the receptors on the gametes are different between the orange and the purple gametes cannot bind to the orange gametes, causing them to bind very poorly. And so each other, the zygote formation is unlikely because they don't have a strong binding on the receptors of their gametes. So this is where the sperm of one species is not able to fertilize or bind to the eggs of another species. So that would be gametic isolation. So those are all of our mechanisms of pre-zygotic, so before the formation of the zygote. And here's another quick video to show you some of the behavioral and visual
all Darwin's finches, like Fortis and Scandens, are similar in plumage. All build dome nests hidden in cactus. All have similar courtship behavior, often using a white seabird feather. They differ in body size, beak size and shape, and in song. It is song in association with the bird's appearance, body size, and beak dimensions that is a pre-mating barrier to interbreeding between the species. Fortis has a blunt beak, Scandens a sharp pointed beak, Magnerostris a massive beak. Fortis songs on the left are short and modulated. Scandin songs on the right are a series of repeated notes. All individuals sing one short song. There is variation between individuals, but always on a species-specific song theme. The Fortis song above sounds like this. A more rapid variation from another Fortis individual sounds like this. Scandin song with repeated notes like this. The Scandins below has a compressed song like this. It is not difficult for us to tell the species apart using size, beak shape, and song, but can the birds? To test if a male territory owner can discriminate between its own and another species by appearance alone, we put two stuffed museum specimens, a female Fortis and a female Scandens, at either end of a pole. The answer was a clear yes, as demonstrated in this old Super 8 video, taking on Helvesa with two different species of ground finches. The female of the male's own species is on the right, the female of the other species on the left. The male territory owner flies up, moves left, and then towards the female of his own species, courts briefly, and attempts to mount. He flies down, picks up a white seabird feather, courts again, and mounts. We then asked if an individual could distinguish between its own and another species purely on the basis of song, in the absence of any morphological cues. Again, the answer was yes. Playback of previously recorded Scandin song elicited a response from Scandins, but not from Fortis. Likewise, Fortis responded to Fortis song, but not Scandin song.
So that is an example of our behavioral isolation. So we have three types of post-zygotic isolation. So this is after the zygote forms. So you may get a healthy offspring, but it may be sterile. And so three types of post-zygotic isolation is a reduced hybrid viability, reduced hybrid fertility, and hybrid breakdown. And so here there's a salamander that does interbreed sometimes, but when the parents are from different species, it impairs the hybrid's development and survival, so it never reproduces. Here we have a male donkey and a female horse. And you get a mule as the offspring. The mule is very healthy and vibrant, but it is sterile. And so that interbreeding creates a sterile offspring. And then we have hybrid breakdown. So the first generation is nice and healthy, but when the next generation breeds, it creates an offspring that is very small, feeble, or sterile. And so this is that hybrid breakdown. This is a breeding between the offspring of the original interbreeding. And so that would be hybrid breakdown as you move through successive generations. The offspring of those next generations become less viable. So here again, this is figure 22.3. And on that question that I ask you as your possible exam questions, you need to do more than just list. It says to discuss. So make sure you give a description and an example of each of these types of zygotic barriers. The 5 pre-zygotic and the 3 post-zygotic. And so as I mentioned, the limitations with our biological species concept is that if animals do come in contact, who don't normally come in contact, they can make a offspring. So here is an example of when a grizzly and a polar bear come together, they make a grolar bear. And I mentioned the lion and the tiger earlier. They can make a liger when they interbreed. But it is very uncommon for these animals to come into contact in the natural world. As I also mentioned before, there's over 24 different species definitions. We are going to stick with the biological, but some other examples are morphological based on appearance, ecological based on the niches and the areas they habitat in an ecosystem. But each one is applied at different times and in different types of research, but for our purposes, we're going to stick with the biological species concept. All right, so we're going to end this first video here, and then I will have a second video for the rest of chapter 22. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out. I'm always available by email.